The day before the wedding was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, or at least one of them. I stood near the back of the country club dining hall, watching my daughter laugh with her bridesmaids while my wife, Karen, floated from table to table like some well-trained hostess. Everyone kept saying how beautiful the venue looked, how lucky we were to have such perfect weather, how radiant Olivia seemed in her white rehearsal dress. And I agreed, outwardly at least. I smiled, shook hands, and made small talk with the groom's family. But the entire time, I felt like something was pressing against my chest, a weight I couldn't quite name yet. I chalked it up to the stress of wedding expenses, or maybe the inevitable anxiety that comes when a father gives his daughter away. It wasn't until I stepped outside to clear my head that everything shifted forever. I walked around to the side of the building, past the rose trellis Olivia had picked out herself during a site visit 6 months ago. It was quiet out there, the kind of quiet you don't appreciate until you're in it. Just wind brushing against your ears and the faint sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments in the distance. I had just lit a cigar, my one indulgence, when I heard a voice around the corner. I wouldn't have recognized it if it weren't for how many times I'd heard it yell "Dad" across crowded school fields or whisper "Good night, Daddy" during storms. Olivia. But the voice I heard now wasn't sweet or affectionate. It was angry, impatient, panicked. I paused and leaned slightly, hidden behind a pillar. I don't know why I didn't walk away. Maybe some part of me already knew I was about to hear something that would change everything. "No, he still doesn't know," she hissed into the phone. "Mom said never to tell him. It would ruin the inheritance." Silence. My heart started pounding so loud, I was sure she could hear it. "Yes, I know he thinks I'm his. But we agreed. What's the point now? He's paying for the whole damn wedding. I'm not stupid." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the column beside me to stay upright. It was like the air had been sucked out of the world, and all that remained was the sound of my daughter. My daughter, speaking about me like I was some clueless ATM. Some idiot too in love with a fantasy to see the truth. I didn't hear the rest of the call. My ears were ringing. All I could think about were the nights I stayed up with her during the flu, the time I drove 6 hours back and forth to bring her a forgotten laptop in college, the years I put away money so she wouldn't have to graduate with debt. And now, all of it felt like a lie. Like I'd been cast in a role without knowing the script was fake. When I finally stepped back inside, I wore the same smile I'd left with. I made it through the toasts. I gave her fiancé a firm handshake and told him to take care of her. I laughed when someone asked if I was ready to give her away. And when Karen looped her arm through mine and whispered, "Tomorrow's going to be perfect," I nodded without a word. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long the lie had lived in our house. How many moments were tainted by what they both knew and I didn't. I thought about confronting Karen, demanding the truth. But what would that do? Derail the wedding? Humiliate Olivia? No. Let them have their perfect day. I would give my daughter away with grace. And then I would take everything back. I woke up the morning of the wedding with a tightness in my chest that no amount of coffee or fresh air could shake. Karen lay beside me, already scrolling through her phone, smiling at texts from family and vendors. She was humming, like it was any other happy, normal day. I watched her, wondering how many other days like this she'd floated through, carrying that secret like it was nothing more than an inconvenient appointment she kept rescheduling. She caught me looking and grinned, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "Big day," she said, her eyes bright. I nodded, unsure if I could speak without letting the grief slip through. I kept thinking, if she could hide something like that from me for 25 years, what else was she capable of? The house buzzed with movement. Bridesmaids arriving, curling irons hissing, laughter echoing down the halls. Olivia was in her old bedroom, being prepped by a small army of stylists and friends, none of whom noticed me standing in the doorway for a moment too long. I studied her, my daughter, or at least the person I thought was. She looked radiant, sure, but now everything about her seemed unfamiliar. The way she tilted her head, the sharpness in her tone when she corrected the hairstylist. I kept wondering how much of her was shaped by me, my values, my sacrifices. And how much came from the man whose blood ran in her veins. The man I didn't even know existed until 12 hours ago. "Dad?" she said, catching sight of me in the mirror. Her voice softened just enough to hook into my heart. "You okay?" I forced a smile, just taking it all in. She beamed. "Well, don't cry yet. Save that for the aisle." I almost did cry then, but not for the reasons she thought. I turned away and went downstairs, where the photographer wanted to get a few shots of me adjusting my tie or straightening my cuffs. I played the role, smiling, laughing, saying things like, "She's always been my little girl," even as the words burned my throat. Every toast that day felt like sandpaper against raw skin. Every mention of family, love, or legacy made my stomach churn. I had built my whole identity on being a father, her father. And in a single moment, that foundation had been kicked out from under me. And still, I smiled for the cameras. The ceremony was held at a small vineyard just outside town. Picturesque. The kind of place you rent when you want everything to look perfect in the wedding album, even if everything underneath is broken. I stood in the back of the venue, clutching her bouquet, waiting for the music cue. Olivia took my arm, her fingers light against mine. I looked down at her. She looked nervous. Genuinely nervous, but not about me. She had no idea I knew. No idea that every step I took down that aisle would be the last I'd ever take with her as the version of myself she'd always known. The music swelled, and we walked. Guests turned. Phones rose. I focused on the path in front of me, not daring to look at Karen seated in the front row. My hand trembled once, but I steadied it. Olivia glanced at me and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad." And just like that, the knife twisted deeper. I handed her off. I kissed her cheek. I stepped back into my place and watched her vow her life to someone else, knowing full well that the most sacred vows between her and me had already been broken long before this day. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I didn't storm out. But something inside me cracked, quietly and permanently. After the ceremony, I shook hands and posed for photos. I gave a toast at the reception, short and sweet. Just enough to satisfy appearances. I looked at Karen across the table, and for a moment, I tried to imagine what kind of woman could keep a lie like that going for decades. Had she ever felt guilty? Had she ever thought about telling me the truth? Or was the lie just more convenient? That night, after the last dance and the final sparkler send-off, I went back to our hotel room and didn't say a word. Karen fell asleep within minutes, worn out from the day. I sat in the armchair by the window and stared out at the vineyard, bathed in moonlight. I thought about everything I'd given, emotionally, financially, spiritually. I thought about all the ways I'd shown up, while someone else had simply donated DNA and been allowed to stay in the shadows. I thought about trust and how once it's broken, nothing ever feels the same. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I watched the sky change from black to gray, listened to the slow hum of air conditioning, and stared at Karen's sleeping silhouette beside me. She looked peaceful, innocent, even. That's what stunned me most. How convincingly she wore the mask. I had spent more than 2 decades sharing a bed with someone who carried a secret this corrosive, and yet she slept like a woman without a single regret. I couldn't tell if I admired the audacity or loathed it. Maybe both. My mind wandered to all the times I'd asked about Olivia's baby photos, about the timing of her pregnancy. She always had quick, clean answers. Now those answers felt like scripted lines in a well-rehearsed performance. I was never supposed to know the truth. That was always part of the plan. By 6:30 a.m., I was showered, dressed, and pacing the hotel room. I left Karen a note, just a simple, "Went for a walk, be back soon." But it was a lie. I wasn't going for a walk. I was going to burn it all down. The wedding may have gone on as planned, but I wouldn't let the next chapter of this charade unfold on my dime. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. No appointment, no warning. I showed up when the doors opened and told the receptionist I needed to revise my will immediately. The woman raised her eyebrows, probably assuming I had some urgent medical diagnosis. In a way, I did, only the cancer wasn't in my body, it was in my home. My attorney, Mark, was a no-nonsense kind of guy. We'd known each other for years, but this was the first time he'd ever seen me truly unhinged. He poured me a coffee and sat across from me in the glass-walled conference room. blinking at the venom in my voice as I explained what I needed done. I was calm, but there was a steel edge to every word. I told him to remove both Karen and Olivia from every asset, every policy, every provision. I wanted it airtight, ironclad. I didn't want Olivia to get a single penny after I was gone. Not 1 cent of the inheritance she and her mother had schemed to protect by keeping me in the dark. She's still your legal daughter, Mark said cautiously, tapping his pen against a notepad. Are you sure you want to? I'm sure, I snapped. Blood or not, she made a choice. She knew. She stayed quiet. He nodded slowly. We'll set up a trust. You can reallocate everything to someone else. A charity. A foundation. Whoever you want. Anyone but them, I said. Make sure it's bulletproof. I left the office 3 hours later with documents in hand and an overwhelming sense of clarity. It was done. The house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, the investments, it was all rerouted. I hadn't decided where it would go yet, but I knew exactly where it wouldn't. That alone was enough to keep me steady. On the drive back to the hotel, I called the bank and froze every credit card Karen had access to. I changed online passwords. I updated my emergency contacts. If I could have erased every trace of them from my financial life that morning, I would have done it. My love had been unconditional. My money, however, would no longer be. Back at the hotel, Karen was sipping coffee in her robe, scrolling through photos from the wedding. Everyone looks so happy, she said without looking up. Olivia's going to flip when she sees how stunning the pictures turned out. I stared at her, wondering if the mask would ever slip. I waited for a hint of guilt, a shadow of shame. Nothing. That's great, I said flatly, setting the documents on the table. I need to talk to you. She glanced up, and her smile faded ever so slightly. Okay, what's wrong? I know, I said. 2 words. That's all it took. Her face changed. Not dramatically. She didn't gasp or drop her coffee, but I saw it. A twitch in the jaw. A slight narrowing of the eyes. She wasn't surprised that I knew. She was trying to calculate how long I'd known and how much I'd heard. I don't. Olivia was on the phone during the rehearsal dinner. I heard everything. He still doesn't know I'm not his real daughter. Mom said never to tell him. It would ruin the inheritance. Ring any bells? Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked down at her cup, then back at me. It's not what you think. Save it, I said, my voice steady. You knew. You both did. And you said nothing. For years. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I was young. I didn't know what to do. And then you loved her so much. How could I take that away from you? That's not love, I said. That's control. That's manipulation. You didn't protect me. You protected your lie. She stood up, trembling now. She is your daughter, in every way that matters. You raised her. She calls you dad, because you taught her to lie? I snapped. You both did. We stood in silence, the hum of the mini fridge filling the space between us. Finally, I grabbed my bag. I'm filing for divorce. The cards are frozen. The accounts are changing. You can tell Olivia whatever you want. But as far as I'm concerned, I walked her down the aisle yesterday as a courtesy. That chapter's closed. Karen didn't follow me, didn't scream, didn't beg. She just sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, like a woman who'd gambled everything and finally realized she lost. The papers were filed 3 days later. I stood in the county courthouse, watching the clerk stamp the documents like it was any other transaction, like the end of a 27-year marriage was just another box to check. I felt numb, not angry anymore, not even hurt, just emptied out. Like I'd poured every last ounce of myself into that family, and now all that remained was the shell of a man who used to believe in something as fragile as trust. I didn't wear a tie. I didn't call Karen to let her know. I wanted it to be clean, surgical. I'd said everything I needed to say in that hotel room. And still, part of me couldn't shake the image of her just sitting there, head bowed, accepting the end like she always knew it was a possibility. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a small, extended-stay motel off the interstate. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No fake smiles. No lies humming beneath the floorboards. Just quiet. I ordered cheap takeout and stared at the wall while the news played in the background. I must have played that conversation with Karen 100 times in my head, rewinding certain lines, dissecting every tone and glance. But no matter how I examined it, the truth stayed the same. They lied. For decades. And it wasn't just the fact that Olivia wasn't biologically mine. It was the sheer ease with which they had agreed to keep me in the dark. Like my love, my identity as a father, was just another asset to be managed and exploited. Olivia called the next morning. I stared at her name on the screen until it stopped ringing. She called again an hour later. Then she texted, "Dad, can we talk? Please." I didn't respond. I didn't know her that anymore. But the messages kept coming. Guilt trip after guilt trip, all dressed up as concern. "I don't know what Mom told you, but I didn't mean for you to find out that way. You've always been my father. That hasn't changed. Can you at least hear me out?" By the afternoon, I gave in. Not out of mercy, but because I needed to see if she could even say the truth to my face. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, one of those trendy spots with exposed brick and overpriced lattes. She walked in wearing sunglasses and a stiff expression, like she was preparing for a deposition. I watched her approach, remembering the little girl who used to climb into my lap and beg me to read The Velveteen Rabbit for the 100th time. Now she looked like a stranger. A very beautiful, very well-dressed stranger. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't smile. "Talk." She hesitated. "I never wanted you to find out like that. I was just frustrated. Mom and I had been arguing, and so you told someone I'm not your real father. That I didn't need to know because of the inheritance. That's frustration to you." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her coffee, stirring it even though it was already perfectly blended. "It's complicated." "No," I said flatly. "It's actually pretty simple. You lied. You let me believe a story about our life that wasn't true. I didn't ask to be born into this." She snapped, finally meeting my eyes. "I grew up in it. Mom told me not to say anything. What was I supposed to do? Blow up our whole family?" "You were supposed to tell the truth," I said, my voice rising now. "At some point. Any point. You had years. And instead, you cashed in on the lie." She recoiled, and for a second, her composure cracked. "You're still my dad. You raised me." "I did," I said. "And you let me." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating what she could say to soften this, to salvage whatever she thought could still be salvaged. But I was done negotiating with ghosts. "I rewrote the will," I said finally. "You and your mother are out. Completely." Her jaw dropped. "What?" "You heard me. You're punishing me for something I didn't choose." "No," I said. "I'm protecting what's left of myself. You made a choice to let me live a lie, and now I'm making a choice to end it." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair slightly. "You're cold," she said, her voice trembling. "You're just abandoning me." I stood too, slow and steady. "No, I'm just finally seeing you clearly." She stormed out, leaving her untouched coffee and a small crowd of curious eyes in her wake. I stood there a moment longer, then left a 10 on the table and walked out into the sunlight, feeling the sharp sting of freedom. 2 weeks passed before I saw Olivia again. I hadn't planned to see her at all, but she showed up at my doorstep like a ghost that refused to stay buried. I had moved into a rental house, small, 2-bedroom, barely furnished beyond a couch, a coffee table, and a mattress on the floor. I didn't want the distraction of furniture. I didn't want comfort. What I wanted, more than anything, was distance. Distance from the lies, from the obligations, from the version of myself I no longer believed in. But when the knock came, quiet at first, then louder, I knew it was her before I opened the door. And still, I opened it. She stood there with puffy eyes and a crumpled tissue in her fist. Her makeup was smudged, her blouse wrinkled like she hadn't cared how she looked for once in her life. It should have broken me. A year ago, maybe even a month ago, it would have. But now all I felt was a hollow ache. Familiar. Dull. The kind that lingers long after the wound stops bleeding. "Dad," she said, her voice catching. "I told you not to call me that anymore," I said, blocking the doorway. She flinched, just slightly. "I need to talk to you. Face to face." I considered slamming the door, but I didn't. Maybe some part of me wanted to know if she was capable of telling the truth without hiding behind a phone screen or a carefully rehearsed apology. I stepped aside. She walked in and looked around like she'd just stepped into a stranger's life, and in many ways, she had. "This is where you live now?" she asked, turning in place. "For now." She nodded and sat down, folding her hands in her lap like a child waiting for punishment. "I've been thinking about everything." I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms. "And I should have told you. Years ago, I knew the truth, and I let it stay buried. I told myself it didn't matter because you were there for everything. My recitals, my heartbreaks, my graduation. You were the only father I ever had. But I also I knew, that keeping it from you meant I was choosing convenience over honesty." I said nothing. I just let the weight of her words hang there, heavy and late. She took a breath. "Mom said we were protecting you, that telling you would just hurt you. But now I see it. It wasn't about protecting you. It was about control, about money, about keeping the story clean." "It wasn't a story," I said. "It was my life." She nodded slowly, eyes welling. "I'm sorry." I stayed quiet. The apology sounded good, scripted, maybe, but good. Still, it didn't change what had been done. Regret doesn't rewind time. It doesn't unburn bridges. "I'm not here to ask for money," she added quickly, almost like she was anticipating my response. "I know what you've done with the will. I know the accounts are frozen. I'm not trying to reverse that. So what do you want?" She swallowed. "I want to understand if there's still a chance. Not for money. For us." I walked over and sat across from her. "Let me ask you something. Do you know who your biological father is?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Have you met him?" "Once. When I was 16. Mom arranged it. She said I needed to know where I came from. But he didn't want anything to do with me. Didn't even look me in the eye." I nodded. That tracked. The kind of man who fathers a child, lets another man raise her, and disappears into the fog of convenience. "Well," I said, standing, "maybe now he can start picking up the pieces. Because I'm done." Olivia stood too, panic blooming on her face. "So that's it. After everything, you're just cutting me off." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I gave you 25 years. I gave you every ounce of love I had. You gave me a lie. And not just any lie. The kind that rewrites your entire sense of self. So no, I'm not obligated to give you anything else. Not time. Not money. Not forgiveness." She stepped back, as if the words had physically struck her. "But I'm your daughter." "No," I said. "You're someone I raised. Someone I loved like my own. But that love was built on an agreement, spoken or not, that we were being honest with each other. That agreement ended the moment you decided protecting the lie was more important than protecting me." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but I didn't move to wipe them. I had done that too many times already. She backed toward the door. "You're not the man I thought you were. And you're exactly the woman I never wanted you to become." She left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the silence returned, wrapping around me like a familiar coat. I stood there for a long time, letting the stillness settle. Outside, a storm was starting to roll in. I welcomed it. 3 months passed. 3 long, aching months of silence. I didn't hear from Olivia. I didn't hear from Karen. No calls, no emails, not even a forwarded birthday card or passive-aggressive holiday invitation. It was like someone had hit delete on that part of my life, and what remained was an eerie stillness that both comforted and haunted me. In the beginning, I kept checking my phone, habit, maybe, muscle memory. There was a time when Olivia would text me just to say she was bored in class or send me a picture of her morning latte. I used to love those texts. I'd scroll through old ones sometimes just to remind myself that it had all once felt real. But after everything, I stopped. I deleted the thread. I even changed my number. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to show up at my door again, and I wasn't sure I'd answer. The house I lived in now was smaller but cleaner in ways that had nothing to do with dust. There were no fake smiles in the hallways, no whispers behind closed doors. I spent my days fixing things. Caulking windows, painting trim, unclogging a sink I'd installed wrong the first time. It was the first time in years I'd done things for myself without worrying if it would please someone else. That freedom was strange at first, but over time, It became something I craved. I realized I had never really been alone before, not in the emotional sense. Even in the quietest moments of my marriage, I'd still been orbiting around someone else's comfort. Now, I was learning what it meant to sit with my own silence and not flinch. One morning, a manila envelope arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Olivia, about 5 years old, in a pink tutu, grinning with a gap-toothed smile as she clung to my neck. I remembered the day. Her first ballet recital. She'd frozen halfway through the performance, and I had stood in the wings clapping anyway, mouthing, "You're doing great," until she started to move again. Behind the photo was a note, written in her handwriting. 6 words. This was real. I remember everything. I sat with the picture for a long time, the paper warm from my hands, the ink smudged from sweat or maybe something else. I didn't cry. I didn't call. But I didn't throw it away either. I placed it in the top drawer of my desk, between old tax documents and an unopened birthday card from a friend I hadn't spoken to since the divorce. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I could remember. I could honor what had once been true, even if everything after it wasn't. Not long after, I ran into Karen at the grocery store. She looked thinner, pale. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and she wore sunglasses indoors, as if still hiding behind something. We locked eyes in the produce section. I could have turned away, walked to another aisle, pretended I didn't see her. But I didn't. I stood still and waited. "Hi," she said, adjusting her grip on a basket full of grapes and overpriced juice. "Karen." Her voice shook slightly. "You look well." "I am." She swallowed. "I heard about the house. Olivia said you're settling in." "I am." She gave a short, awkward laugh. "You always were stubborn. And you always were a good liar." Her face fell. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was true. And for the first time in our history, I was done sugarcoating the truth just to keep the peace. There was no more peace to keep. "I didn't want it to end like this," she said softly. "But you were okay letting it live like that," I replied. She nodded, and to her credit, didn't argue. "She misses you." She had her chance. I know. We stood there in silence. Two people who had once shared a life now reduced to strangers who couldn't even finish a conversation about fruit. Eventually, she turned and walked away. I didn't watch her go. The fallout hadn't stopped with our family. Word had gotten around. Cousins asking questions, old friends calling to check in, some subtle, some not. One even had the nerve to say, "Well, at least you found out before putting her in the will." I stopped answering those calls too. I didn't need their pity. I didn't need their validation. I had made my choice, and for once in my life, I wasn't looking for approval. The freedom wasn't just from them. It was from needing to be the person everyone expected me to be. There was a finality to it all now. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from closure, but from acceptance. I wasn't angry anymore. Just resolved. I still thought about Olivia. Not every day, but often enough. I'd see a father with his daughter at the park, or hear a certain song on the radio, and for a second I'd feel the tug of something that once was. But then I'd remember the phone call, the lie, the betrayal buried beneath years of staged smiles, and the moment would pass. One afternoon, I walked a trail near my house, a winding path through tall pines and scattered oak leaves. I'd walked it many times before, but this time felt different. It was quiet. Just me and the wind and the sound of gravel beneath my boots. I reached a small clearing with a bench and sat down. I took out my phone, looked at the empty call log, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That walk, I realized, was my last one as the man I had once been. The husband, the father, the provider, the man who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. That version of me was gone, and in his place stood someone new. Someone scarred, but stronger. Someone who had finally learned that love, when twisted into obligation, stops being love at all. If you've ever had to cut ties with someone you loved because the truth hurt more than the silence, then you understand what this story is about. Family is more than blood. It's about honesty, respect, and choice. Tell me, would you have walked her down the aisle? Or closed the door the second you heard that call? I want to hear your story. Leave a comment, and let's talk about what loyalty really means. See you soon in the next story.